In this lesson 3.4, we're going to solve quadratics by completing the square. On your notes page, you have all of this written down, so you don't need to write it. But let's go ahead. We're going to work through this example. It's kind of partially here already for you. We're going to work through it just so you have a really good example to come back to and look at. So whenever we complete the square, typically we use this method whenever we're trying to find other things about our quadratic or about our parabola. So maybe we're trying to find our vertex. This is a really easy way to find a vertex, or if we're working on circles or ellipses, this is a process that we use to help us with that. So let's go ahead and practice one of these. First step is going to be to move your constant to the other side. That word constant is just the thing that doesn't have a variable, right? Your number that's all by itself. In this case, I have -4, so I would add 4 to both sides, and that's exactly what I did. Now, whenever we move these over, you're going to be in the habit of putting these blanks in. That just helps your brain to know, hey, something needs to go there. Your next step is to divide the middle number by 2. So my middle number, or my b in this case, is -6. And I'm going to divide that by 2. -6 divided by 2 is -3. And then it says to square it. So I'm going to square that, and -3 squared is 9. 9 is what goes on both blanks. So middle number divided by 2 squared goes on both blanks. Now, this new number is going to go in parentheses on the left. So this was -3, and so my -3 is going to come down here, and I'm going to show you why right now. So let's look at, if I had x squared minus 6x plus 9. This is kind of just an off to the side note. Okay. So if I have x squared minus 6x plus 9, and I want to factor that, I would have 1's on the left. My numbers that multiply to 9 and add to 6 are 3 and 3. And then they would both be negative to get me -6. So this is x minus 3 and x minus 3. Now, whenever you have the same factor twice, you can write that as that factor squared. So whatever we're doing here, we're trying to get this left-hand side so that I can write it as some factor squared. And this is the process to find that number that will always work. Always, always, always. So that's where that comes from. We are now going to simplify the right side. So I have 4 plus 9, and my 4 plus 9 is going to come down here. That gives me 13. So we simplify the right and then rewrite the left. Now, because I have a square, I can take the square root of both sides, and this is still -3, and this is still 13, because we added the square root in. Let me add that on this one too. All right, we took the square root. Because we added that square root in, we need that plus minus in there. And plus minus, what that really means is I have two answers. My first answer is x minus 3 equals positive square root of 13. And my other answer is x minus 3 equals negative square root of 13. And that negative is already there for you. So plus minus just splits. I have two answers. And then my last step is to solve for x. So I'm going to add 3 on both sides. Those cancel out. Now, adding 3 to the square root of 13 is just 3 plus the square root of 13. I can't do anything with that. Same thing on this side. I'm going to add 3, and that's going to give me 3 minus the square root of 13. Now, this feels a little weird whenever we're not writing all of the steps down, but I wanted you, again, just to have a really good example to come back to. So we're going to go ahead and walk through the next example really slow. If you're confused right now, that's okay. Bear with me. We're going to go through this next one. It'll feel better, I promise. All right, here we go. Step number 1. I take my constant and I move it to the other side. Whenever I do that, I'm going to add blanks in. So x squared minus 2x plus blank equals 8 plus blank. I've seen students not write the blanks in and then they forget to add stuff to both sides. So that's just a way, again, to help your brain remember that you need to do that. Then you take your middle number, which in this case is -2, and divide it by 2. We always divide by 2. -2 divided by 2 is -1, and then I square that. -1 squared, or -1 times -1 is +1, and 1 is what fills in both blanks. Now, whenever I rewrite this, my kind of skeleton that I'm writing into is x something squared equals something. So on the left-hand side, whatever was in parentheses before I squared it comes down, so -1. And then the other side I combine, 8 and 1 give me 9. Again, this x minus 1 squared comes from, think about if I factored this, I need two numbers that multiply to 1 and add to 2, so that would be 1 and 1. To get -2, they're both negative. So x minus 1 and x minus 1. Because I have the same factor twice, I can write that as x minus 1 squared. And now we're just solving for x. We've done this before, this is familiar to you. I have a square, so I'm going to start by square rooting both sides. That square root's going to cancel out my square. I'm left with just x minus 1. And then the square root of 9 is 3, but because we added the square root in, I need that plus minus. From here, I'm going to split this into two equations. So I have x minus 1 equals +3, and x minus 1 equals -3. And now I can solve for x. On the left-hand side, I'm going to add 1. So x equals 4. The other side, I'm going to add 1, and x equals -2. Again, to recap, we move our constant to the other side and add blanks. We take our middle number, divide it by 2, square it. That goes on both sides. Then I rewrite as x something squared equals whatever the right-hand side adds to, and then we're just solving for x. So I square root both sides, and then split that into two equations to solve for x. I'm going to have you try this next one. Pause the video, try the next one, and then whenever you're ready or you get stuck, hit play to see how you're doing. Here's your next example. This one's already been moved for you, so all you need to do is add those blanks in, and you're ready to rock and roll. Go ahead, pause the video, you try, hit play whenever you're ready. All right, let's check in. I take that middle number, I divide it by 2, and then I square it. So I have 25 being added to both sides. Whenever I rewrite, whatever was in parentheses before I squared it comes down. So I have +5 there, and again, just as a check, multiply to 25, add to 10, would be 5 and 5, and that's what I have, and we're good. And that equals whatever 39 plus 25 is, which is 64. So that part gets brought down. This is kind of the weirdest part. From here, students are typically pretty good. To solve for x, we're going to square root both sides. My square root cancels out my square. I'm left with x plus 5. The square root of 64 is plus minus 8. And now I can split this into two equations. So I'm going to have x plus 5 equals +8, and then x plus 5 equals -8. From here, I'm going to subtract 5. So x equals 3. And then I subtract 5 on this side, and x equals -13. I'll leave this up here for just a second so you can jot down anything you need to. Now this next example, you'll notice, looks a little bit different. It's similar, but there's a number in front. For our purposes, we can't complete the square with a number in front. So if you have a leading coefficient, that's the number in the very, very front, if you have a leading coefficient, we have to divide it out. Okay, so if you have a leading coefficient, divide it out. In this case, my leading coefficient is 3. So I'm going to divide all of my pieces by 3, even the 0. This is similar to taking the GCF, but I'm just getting rid of the 3. I'm dividing both sides by 3. I can do that. That's fine. This is going to give me x squared minus 4x minus 12 equals 0. Again, just like the last one, I want you to pause the video. You try to complete the square. So move your pieces, middle number divided by 2 squared, add it to both sides, rewrite, solve, do the whole thing. Okay, you solve, and then hit play whenever you're ready to check your answer. All right, so we start by moving that 12. That gives me x squared minus 4x plus blank equals 12 plus blank. I take my middle number, -4, divide it by 2, which is -2, and then I square it, which gives me 4 on both sides. I rewrite. I have x minus 2 squared equals 16. Again, it's the number before you square it, and then you combine these and bring that down. To solve for x, I'm going to square root both sides. That gives me x minus 2 equals plus minus 4. I can now split this into 2 equations. So x minus 2 equals positive 4 and x minus 2 equals -4. And then I'm going to solve for x. So I'm going to add 2 to both sides, gives me 6. And then add 2 to both sides and gives me -2. Hopefully these are getting a little bit easier for you as you go. These ones were nice. They worked out nice. The last 2 examples we do are a little bit more work. They're hefty in fractions. They're a little bit more complicated, but we're going to use our calculators to help us. We're going to be a-okay. All right, number 4. So first thing, I got to move that constant. My steps are all the same. I'm going to move my constant over. Then I take that middle number, which is -7, and divide it by 2. Now here's what happens. -7 doesn't divide by 2 nicely, so we're just going to leave it as -7 over 2. And now I'm going to square it. In your calculator will do that for you if you're not comfortable doing this in your head. But it is just squaring the 7 and squaring the 2. So 7 squared is 49, and then 2 squared is 4. 49 over 4 is going to fill in both of my blanks. Whenever I rewrite this, I'm still filling into that same kind of skeleton, and whatever was in parentheses before I squared it still comes down here next to x. I know it's a little bit weird because it's a fraction, but it is a-okay. The other side, I'm combining these together. If you're not comfortable doing that on your own, utilize your calculator. So -15 plus 49 over 4 is going to give us -11 over 4. And if you're not comfortable with that, use your calculator. That's why you have it. From here, we're solving for x. So I'm going to square root both sides. And that gives me x minus 7 over 2 equals, now your calculator will simplify this radical for you as long as you have a certain setting in your calculator selected. So the setting that you need to go to is from your normal calculator. Okay, grab your calculator. From your normal calculator, you're going to hit Shift, the yellow button, and then Menu. It's the gray button next to the gray circle. And that should bring up a bunch of settings. You're going to scroll down to one past angle. So on your main screen, it goes all the way to angle. If you scroll down one more, there's one that says complex mode. And you want to make sure your complex mode is a plus bi, and it's F2. That's the button that you're going to hit. And you can hit exit, and your calculator will simplify these radicals for you. It'll give you I in your answer. It'll do the whole thing. Your calculator will give you I at the end. I don't put it at the end. I put it at the beginning. So my answer would be plus minus I square root of 11 over 2. Your calculator will give you the same thing, but it'll put the I at the end back here. And it's okay there, as long as it's not underneath your radical. All right, now I hope everybody agrees that this is not a nice, pretty answer, right? It doesn't look like 4 and -2 like we had on 1, 2, and 3. So for these ones, you don't need to split them. You can keep them all together. So I'm going to add my 7 over 2, which gives me 7 over 2 plus minus I square root of 11 over 2. Remember, the piece with I goes at the end, right? Goes at the back. Since both of these have the same denominator, if you don't like the way this is written, you can bring these together. So I'd have all my numerator stuff together, and then it's all over 2. Again, a little bit weird, a little bit more complicated. Same process though, same steps. Don't let the fractions throw you off. Utilize your calculator. Make sure you're in the right settings. Go back up in case you want to jot those settings down. We're going to do one more of these that aren't super nice together. I'm not going to leave you on your own yet. All right, here's our last example. Let's go ahead. We're going to work our way through. I start by moving my constant. I rewrite, and I include those blanks. I take my middle number 9, divide it by 2. That's not nice, so I'm going to leave it like that and then square it. 9 squared is 81, and 2 squared is 4. 81 over 4 fills in both blanks. Whenever I rewrite and I'm plugging into my skeleton, whatever was in parentheses before I squared it is what comes down next to x. And then I'm going to combine 13 and 81 over 4, and that's going to go down here. Again, utilize your calculator, type in 13 plus 81 over 4. You should get 133 over 4. Now I'm going to square root both sides. That leaves me x plus 9 over 2 on the left. And the right, I can't do anything with this one, so it's just plus minus square root 133 over 2. And your calculator gives you that. So if you type in square root of 133 over 4, your square root is shift, the yellow button, and then x squared. That's how you type in a square root. Finally, to get x by itself, I'm going to subtract 9 over 2. Again, these ones aren't pretty and nice, so I'm just going to leave it all together. That gives me negative 9 over 2 plus minus the square root of 133 over 2. You can leave your answer like this, or if you don't like that, or you want to clean it up, you can bring it all together because they have the same denominator. At this point, this is everything that you need to be able to do your 3.4 assignment. If you have questions, please reach out to your teacher. They would be happy to help you.